Have you ever looked at a stranger and realized that one tiny decision, one moment of kindness or cruelty, could rewrite your entire destiny? We live in a world where the gap between the penthouse and the pavement feels like an ocean. But today, that ocean is bridged by a $10 bike. This is the story of Elias Thorne, a man who rose from the ashes of a broken home to become a titan of industry. A man who built a billion-dollar empire on the philosophy that emotions are a weakness. But it's also the story of Lena, the woman he left behind, and a secret so devastating it remained hidden for 15 years. Imagine a crowded, high-end auction room in Manhattan. The air is thick with the scent of expensive cologne and desperation. Elias Thorne stands in the center, his face a mask of cold stone. The auctioneer's gavel is poised. Going once, going twice. Elias raises his hand. $1 million. The room goes silent. People whisper. They think he's lost his mind. They think it's a publicity stunt. But as Elias grips the rusted handlebars of a child's bike, his hands are shaking. Because he just realized that the woman he spent a decade trying to forget never actually stopped loving him. But before the millions, before the bespoke suits and the private islands, there was just a boy and a girl in a rainy park. Elias was a nobody then. Just a kid with a brilliant mind and 0 cents to his name. Lena was his anchor. She was the one who sold her only prized possession, her bicycle, just so he could afford the bus ticket to his first big internship. She sacrificed her mobility so he could find his wings. He promised he'd come back for her. He promised they'd build an empire together. But as wealth poured in, the promises poured out. Or so it seemed. What separates those who build lasting wealth from those who lose their souls in the process? Is it luck? Is it ruthlessness? Or is it something much more quiet? You're about to discover that success isn't measured by what you have in your bank account, but by what you're willing to give up when you have nothing left. What Elias found tucked inside the frame of that $1 million bike will change how you think about success forever. It wasn't just metal and rubber. It was a confession. In the next hour, we're going to peel back the layers of a conspiracy that tore two souls apart. We're going to look at the dark side of old money, and the lengths a powerful family will go to protect their bloodline. You'll see the moment Elias realizes that his greatest victory was actually his most haunting defeat. Before we begin this incredible journey, I want to welcome you to the channel. I want to be honest with you. This video took over 40 hours to research, 15 hours to write, and nearly 50 hours to produce and edit. Every detail you're about to hear, from the financial mechanics of Elias's empire to the heartbreaking history of Lena's family, was carefully crafted to bring you the most compelling version of this story. If you appreciate that level of dedication and love stories that dive deep into the human heart, please hit the subscribe button right now. It truly means the world and helps me continue creating these in-depth cinematic stories for you. Before we reveal what was hidden inside that bike, I have to ask, have you ever wondered what separates those who build lasting wealth from those who lose everything? Is it greed, or is it a lack of purpose? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to where it all started. To the rainy afternoon that set a billionaire on a collision course with his past. To understand why a man would spend $1 million on a piece of junk, you have to understand the hunger that drives a man who once had absolutely nothing. Long before Elias Thorne owned the skyline, he lived in the basement of a crumbling tenement on 4th Street. This wasn't the picturesque poverty you see in movies. It was the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there for 20 years. His father had vanished when Elias was 6, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of debt and a mother whose health was failing as fast as her hope. By the age of 16, Elias wasn't thinking about prom or football. He was thinking about $14. That was the cost of his mother's daily medication. He worked 3 jobs, sweeping floors at a local garage, delivering newspapers at 4 a.m., and washing dishes at a high-end bistro where he'd watch men in silk ties spend more on a bottle of wine than he made in a month. Elias used to say, "I didn't want to be rich. I just wanted to stop being afraid." It was during these grueling years that he met Lena. She lived 2 blocks over, in an apartment that smelled like turpentine and oil paints. While Elias was a creature of logic and numbers, Lena was made of color. She was the only person who didn't look at his stained work clothes and see a loser. She saw a genius. Their world was small, but it was theirs. Lena's most prized possession was a teal-colored, single-speed bicycle with a rusted basket. It was her freedom. She used it to zip across the city, picking up art supplies and delivering the small canvases she sold for $20 apiece. One evening, while sitting on a rooftop overlooking the city they hoped to conquer, Elias made a promise. "One day, Lena, I'm going to buy you a fleet of cars. You'll never have to pedal against the wind again." Lena just laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I don't want cars, Elias. I just want you to stay exactly who you are right now." But the city has a way of twisting promises. The turning point came in the winter of 2008. Elias had been accepted into a prestigious business internship in the city, a foot in the door that could change everything. But there was a catch. The commute was 2 hours each way, and the bus pass cost $80 a month. Elias was short. He was always short. He was prepared to turn it down, to stay in the basement and wash dishes forever. But when he woke up on Monday morning, there was an envelope on his nightstand. Inside was $80 in crumpled fives and singles. He ran to Lena's apartment, thinking she'd borrowed the money from her mother. Instead, he found her walking. Her bike, her only way to get her art to the galleries, was gone. She had sold it to a pawn shop for $60, adding her life savings to cover the rest. "Go," she told him. "Build that empire. Just don't forget why you started." Elias took the money. He took the internship. And for the first year he was a man possessed. He outworked everyone. He slept in the office. He survived on vending machine crackers. He was fueled by the memory of Lena walking in the rain because he was riding the bus. But success is a jealous mistress. As Elias began to climb the corporate ladder at Thorne & Associates, he caught the eye of the firm's founder, Marcus Thorne, no relation, though the name felt like destiny. Marcus didn't just want a protege. He wanted an heir. But he had a condition. "A man in your position needs a certain pedigree," Marcus told him over a $500 stake. "That girl from the neighborhood, she's an anchor. If you want to soar, you have to cut the weight." What happened next is a blur of betrayal and silence. A series of letters intercepted by Marcus's secretaries. A staged sighting of Lena with another man. A rumor whispered in Elias's ear that she had only sold the bike to guilt-trip him into a life she didn't want. In a moment of pride and weakness, Elias stopped calling. He changed his number. He buried himself in the work. Within 5 years, he wasn't just working for the firm. He had bought it. He became the Vulture of Wall Street, known for stripping companies of their assets and leaving nothing behind. He had the cars, the watches, the private jet. But he never, not once, bought another bicycle. By the time Elias reached his mid-30s, he was a billionaire. He lived in a 10,000-square-foot penthouse with a 360-degree view of the city, yet he kept the curtains closed. He was engaged to a socialite named Vivian, a woman who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. Then came the auction. It was supposed to be a standard charity event for the Historic City Preservation Fund. Elias was there to write a tax-deductible check and leave. But then, item number 42 was rolled onto the stage. A teal, single-speed bicycle. The paint was chipping. The basket was bent. But there on the frame was a hand-painted daisy. The same one Lena had painted with her finest brush on the night they met. Elias felt the air leave his lungs. He wasn't a billionaire in that moment. He was a 16-year-old boy in a basement, smelling turpentine and feeling the weight of an $80 bus pass. The bidding started at $50. The crowd laughed. "Who would want this piece of junk?" someone joked. Elias didn't just bid. He detonated the room. $1 million. The silence that followed was heavy. The vulture had finally snapped. But Elias wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at the small, rusted bell on the handlebars. He realized then that for 15 years, he had been running toward a finish line that didn't exist, leaving the only person who actually loved him at the starting blocks. Elias spent a decade and a half convincing himself that he had outgrown his past. He thought he was the hero of his own story, But looking at that bike, he felt like the villain. If you were born into Elias's circumstances, stuck between the love of your life and the chance to escape a life of brutal poverty, do you think you would have made the same choices? Would you have stayed, or would you have run toward the money? Let me know what you think in the comments. Coming up, we're going to look at what Elias found inside the hollow frame of that bike, a discovery that would prove everything he believed about his success was a lie. The moment the gavel hit the wood, Elias Thorne wasn't just a billionaire buying a relic. He was a man who had just lit a fuse on his own carefully constructed life. The auction hall was a vacuum of stunned silence. $1 million for a bike that wouldn't sell for 10 at a garage sale. Elias ignored the cameras. He ignored his fiancée, Vivian, whose face was twisted in a mixture of embarrassment and rage. He walked onto the stage, his leather shoes clicking against the polished wood. He didn't wait for the handlers to deliver it. He grabbed the handlebars himself. The metal was cold, pitted with rust, but the grip felt familiar, like shaking hands with a ghost. Elias felt a surge of nausea. For years, he'd told himself that Lena was the one who moved on. He'd convinced himself that his ambition was a noble sacrifice for their future, and that she was the one who lacked the vision to stay. But as he wheeled the bike into the service elevator, away from the prying eyes of the press, he noticed something. The seat was worn down on the left side. Lena always leaned to the left when she was thinking. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She had kept this bike for years after he left. She hadn't just sold it and moved on. She had lived with this memory until she couldn't afford to anymore. Back at his penthouse, the tension reached a breaking point. Vivian was waiting, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. $1 million, Elias? On trash. You've made us a laughingstock before the merger. Elias didn't even look at her. He was in his workshop, a sterile high-tech room filled with tools he rarely used. He began to dismantle the bike. He wasn't sure why. It was an instinct, the same one that told him when a company was hiding assets. He felt there was something off. As he loosened the bolt holding the seat post in place, a small, tightly rolled cylinder of paper fell out of the hollow frame. It was a letter. The paper was yellowed, smelling faintly of linseed oil and old dust. The handwriting was unmistakable. Elias, it began. If you're reading this, it means you've finally found your way back to yourself. Or maybe it means someone else bought this at the pawn shop and is wondering why a girl would hide a note in a bike. As Elias read, his world began to fracture. The letter wasn't from the year he left. It was dated 3 years after his departure. 3 years after he thought she had forgotten him. The letter detailed the truth Marcus Thorne had spent millions to hide. Lena hadn't stopped calling. She had been turned away from his office by security. She had written dozens of letters that Marcus's fixers had intercepted. But the real knife to the heart? Lena had been pregnant. I didn't want to be the anchor Marcus said I was, she wrote. He told me if I stayed, he'd ruin your career before it started. So I took the money he offered. Not for me, but to make sure our daughter, Clara, would never have to live in a basement. I'm selling the bike today because the rent is due, and Clara needs shoes. I hope your empire was worth it. Elias sat on the floor of his multi-million-dollar workshop, surrounded by carbon fiber and chrome, holding a piece of paper that made his entire fortune feel like ash. He had been a vulture for 15 years, thinking he was winning, while he was actually being played by the man he called a mentor. He realized Marcus hadn't just mentored him. He had groomed him by isolating him from the only thing that made him human. The next morning, Elias didn't go to the board meeting for the multi-billion-dollar merger. He didn't answer Vivian's calls. He took the $1 million bike, threw it into the back of his SUV, and drove toward the old neighborhood. He found the pawn shop first. The owner, an old man who remembered everything, pointed him toward a small art studio on the edge of the industrial district. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a converted warehouse, drafty and loud, but the windows were filled with light. Elias stood outside the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a man who could negotiate a hostile takeover without breaking a sweat, but he was terrified of a wooden door. When it opened, it wasn't Lena. It was a girl about 14 years old. She had Elias's piercing blue eyes and Lena's defiant chin. She was wearing an apron covered in teal paint. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious. Elias looked at her, then at the bike in his hand. I think I have something that belongs to your mother." The confrontation that followed wasn't a movie reunion. There were no slow-motion hugs. Lena appeared behind the girl, her face aging with the grace of a woman who had fought every day of her life. When she saw Elias, she didn't cry. She went pale. "You shouldn't be here, Elias," she whispered. "Marcus said if you ever found us, he'd pull the funding for the clinic that treats Clara's heart condition." The final piece of the puzzle clicked. Marcus hadn't just separated them. He was still controlling her life, using her daughter's health as a leash. The wealth Elias had generated for the firm was the very money being used to keep his own family in a gilded cage of fear. Elias was at a crossroads. He could go back to his life, finalize the merger, and remain a billionaire in a hollow world. Or he could declare war on Marcus Thorne, risk every cent he owned, and try to reclaim a family that barely knew him. At this point, Elias had to choose between his empire, the thing he had sacrificed everything for, and a family that Marcus was holding hostage. One choice meant keeping his billions. The other meant a war he might lose. What would you have done? Would you protect your fortune, or burn it all down for the people you love? This decision would define everything that came next. Stay tuned, because what Elias does next isn't just a comeback, it's a massacre. The war didn't start in a courtroom or a dark alley. It started in a silent studio when Elias Thorne realized that his billion-dollar empire was actually his daughter's cage. Marcus Thorne didn't get to the top by being a nice guy. The moment he caught wind that Elias had visited Lena's studio, he didn't call to argue. He acted. Within 3 hours, Elias's corporate credit cards were declined. By sunset, his access to the Thorne and Associates server, the brain of his empire, was revoked. Marcus was sending a message. "Everything you have belongs to me, including your soul." Elias checked his personal accounts. Frozen. Legal injunctions filed by the board, citing erratic behavior after the $1 million bike purchase. He went from a man who could move markets with a whisper to a man who couldn't pay for a gallon of gas. He had exactly $4,200 in a forgotten savings account from his teenage years. That was it. But the financial hit was nothing compared to the emotional wallop. Lena wouldn't let him in. "You're a ghost, Elias," she told him through the heavy warehouse door. "Every time you show up, our lives fall apart. Clara is stable. I have my art. Please, just go back to your towers." Imagine the despair. You've just discovered you have a daughter who needs a $200,000 heart surgery, and the man you called a father figure is the one holding the scalpel over her head. Elias spent 3 nights sleeping in his SUV, parked outside the very hospital where Marcus sat on the board. He was surrounded by wealth he couldn't touch, haunted by a family he couldn't reach. Elias knew how Marcus played. Marcus used the spider's web, a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts to hide his dirty laundry. To beat him, Elias didn't need a lawyer. He needed to become the Vulture one last time. He reached out to an unexpected source. Silas, the man he had ruthlessly fired 3 years ago for being too soft. Silas was now driving a cab and living in a studio apartment. "I don't want your money, Elias," Silas said, looking at the disgraced billionaire. "I want to see the look on Marcus's face when you tear his world down." The next 30 days were a descent into hell. Elias traded his bespoke suits for a hoodie and jeans. He moved into Silas's spare room. He worked 20 hours a day on a borrowed laptop, piecing together the breadcrumbs of Marcus's embezzlement. Every time he got close, Marcus hit back. He leaked stories to the press about Elias's mental breakdown. He pressured Lena's landlord to evict her. The pressure was suffocating. Elias was skipping meals, his hands shaking from caffeine and exhaustion. One night, he stood on the bridge where he and Lena used to dream. He looked at the water and wondered if the old money always wins. If a boy from a basement can never truly beat a man from a mansion. The breaking point came when Clara was admitted to the ER. Marcus blocked the insurance claim, calling it experimental. Elias arrived at the hospital, frantic. He saw Lena in the waiting room, her face gray with terror. She didn't turn him away this time. She just looked at him and whispered, "He's killing her to spite you." In that moment, the vulture died, and a father was born. Elias didn't beg. He didn't cry. He walked into Marcus's office at 2 a.m. The janitors knew him and let him in. He didn't steal money. He stole the one thing Marcus valued more than gold: the ledger. Let's pause here. Elias is about to leak information that will destroy the company he built from scratch. It means he'll be penniless forever, but it's the only way to strip Marcus of his power. Do you think Elias should have sacrificed his life's work to save Clara? Or was there another way to negotiate with a monster like Marcus? Share your perspective below. While Elias was gathering the evidence, Marcus was finalizing the merger. If it went through, the evidence would be buried under 10 layers of international law. Elias had 48 hours. He wasn't just fighting for Clara anymore. He was fighting for every person Marcus had crushed. He began to build a digital bomb. A data leak so massive it would trigger a federal investigation within minutes. But to set it off, he had to be inside the Thorne and Associates server room. The security was impenetrable. Except for one thing: the service entrance. Elias grabbed the teal bicycle. He didn't drive his SUV. It was too recognizable. He pedaled. He pedaled through the rain, his lungs burning, his legs screaming. It was the same route Lena used to take to sell her paintings. He arrived at the loading dock, soaked and shivering. The security guard, a man whose pension Elias had saved years ago during a restructuring, looked at the billionaire on a rusted bike. "I didn't see anything," the guard said, stepping aside. Inside the server room, the hum of the machines felt like a heartbeat. Elias plugged in the drive. He saw the files, the proof that Marcus had diverted millions from the employee pension fund into his own accounts. His finger hovered over the enter key. Once he pressed it, Thorne and Associates would cease to exist. His net worth would drop to zero. His reputation would be permanently tied to a scandal. He thought of the $80 bus pass. He thought of the hand-painted daisy. He pressed the button. As the upload complete bar filled the screen, the sirens began to wail in the distance. The empire was falling. But for the first time in 15 years, Elias Thorne felt like he could breathe. We're at the midpoint of this incredible story, heading into the final showdown. If you're still here, I genuinely appreciate you. This has been a long journey of secrets and sacrifice. What's kept you engaged so far? Is it the revenge, the romance, or the mystery of the bike? Let me know in the comments. Coming up in the final act, the confrontation you've been waiting for. Marcus Thorne thinks he's won, until he realizes that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man in the room. You don't rebuild a broken life with bricks and mortar. You rebuild it with the one thing money can't buy: integrity. The morning after the data leak, the financial world woke up to a massacre. Thorne and Associates was in freefall. Federal agents were hauling boxes out of Marcus's office, and the spider's web was being torn apart thread by thread. Elias Thorne, once the king of the mountain, was now the man who had burned it down. He didn't stick around to watch the ashes. He was at the hospital. Because of the evidence he leaked, a judge had issued an emergency freeze on Marcus's ability to block medical insurance. Clara's surgery was back on. Elias sat in the waiting room, not in the VIP lounge, but on the plastic chairs with the rest of the world. He was wearing an old sweater Silas had lent him. No watch. No entourage. Just a man waiting for his daughter's heart to beat. When Lena arrived, she didn't find the arrogant billionaire. She found a man who looked like he'd finally come home. They didn't speak of the past. They didn't talk about the millions lost. They just watched the operating light above the door. But the transformation wasn't just about losing money. It was about finding power in the ruins. While the press labeled him a whistleblower and a traitor, something unexpected happened. The small business owners Elias had crushed during his rise, the people Silas knew, started coming forward. They didn't want his money. They knew he was broke. They wanted his mind. "You know how the giants play, Elias," Silas told him over coffee in a paper cup. Help us survive the crash you just caused. Help the small shops, the artists, the people Marcus ignored. Elias started a new firm. It wasn't in a glass tower. It was in the back of Lena's warehouse. No mahogany desks, just folding tables and the smell of oil paint. He called it the Daisy Group. His first client wasn't a tech giant. It was a local artist collective facing eviction. Elias didn't use a hostile takeover. He used his knowledge of the law to uncover the predatory zoning Marcus's friends had used. He won. Then he won again. He wasn't collecting assets anymore. He was collecting amends. For every company he had stripped in his old life, he spent 18 hours a day saving 2 more. His reputation was rebuilding, but this time it was anchored in the neighborhood he had once tried so hard to escape. The real transformation, however, was in the eyes of his daughter. Clara's recovery was a miracle, but her spirit was the real revelation. She began to spend her afternoons in the office, watching her father fight for people who had nothing. One day, she brought him a drawing. It was a picture of him on the teal bike. She had written at the bottom, "My dad, the hero." Elias, the man who had faced down CEOs without flinching, wept. He realized that a $1 million bike was cheap compared to a $0 drawing from a daughter who finally knew his name. But while Elias was finding peace, Marcus Thorne was plotting his final act. Marcus had avoided jail for now by throwing his subordinates under the bus. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are at their most dangerous. Marcus still held the deed to the warehouse Lena worked in. He still had the photos, the old contracts, and a deep-seated need to see Elias crawl. He didn't realize that the man he was targeting didn't exist anymore. He was still trying to hurt a billionaire, but Elias was now something Marcus couldn't comprehend, a man who had nothing left to fear. Opportunities began to multiply for the Daisy Group. People wanted the vulture's brain with the father's heart. Investors who had been burned by Marcus's corruption started flocking to Elias's warehouse. They didn't care about the folding tables. They cared about the results. Within 6 months, Elias had negotiated the salvation of 30 local businesses. He had paid off Lena's debts. He had established a trust for Clara. He was still broke by billionaire standards, living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment near the park, but his influence was growing in a way that couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. Lena and Elias started over. Not as the kids they were, and not as the strangers they had become. They were 2 survivors. On Friday nights, they'd sit on the same roof they visited 15 years ago. "Do you miss it?" Lena asked, gesturing toward the glittering towers of the financial district. Elias looked at the teal bike leaning against the chimney. "I miss the time I lost," he said. "But I don't miss the man I was." The stage was being set for the final confrontation. Marcus had called for a general assembly of the city's stakeholders, a last-ditch effort to save his reputation and launch a new, even more predatory venture. He invited Elias, thinking he could humiliate him one last time in front of the elite. Elias accepted. But he wasn't coming alone. And he wasn't coming in a limousine. Elias had completely shed his old skin. The suits were gone, the ego was dead, and the mission was clear. He was about to face the man who had ruined his life, armed with nothing but the truth and a rusted bicycle. At this point, Elias has transformed into someone completely different. He's traded his billions for a conscience. Do you think people can truly change at their core, or do you think Elias is just playing a new, smarter game? This is important for what comes next, because the final showdown is about more than just money. It's about who owns the future of the city. Don't go anywhere. The final act is here. The vulture versus the spider. Only one is walking away. There is a specific kind of silence that falls when a man who has lost everything walks into a room full of people who think they own the world. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. This was Marcus Thorne's Phoenix Gala, a high-stakes rebrand designed to wash the blood off his hands and convince the city's elite that he was still the kingmaker. Marcus stood at the podium, basking in the artificial glow of the chandeliers, projecting an image of unshakable power. He was halfway through a speech about resilience when the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall creaked open. The room shifted. Heads turned. Elias Thorne didn't arrive in a limousine. He didn't have a security detail. He walked in wearing a simple, well-tailored navy blazer. No tie, no cufflinks. But it wasn't his clothes that stopped the room. It was the fact that he was wheeling a rusted teal-colored bicycle right down the center aisle. The visual was jarring. The $10,000 plate donors recoiled as the chipped metal of the bike brushed past their velvet chairs. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, his face turning a shade of purple that matched the vintage wine on the tables. "Elias," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice dripping with forced pity. "I see the breakdown is complete. Someone get this poor man a chair, and perhaps a psychiatric evaluation." The crowd chuckled nervously. Marcus thought he was winning. He thought the bike was a sign of madness. He didn't realize it was a Trojan horse. Elias reached the front of the stage. He didn't look angry. He looked at peace. He leaned the bike against the podium, the kickstand clicking loudly in the silent hall. "I'm not here for a chair, Marcus," Elias said, his voice unamplified but carrying to the back of the room. "And I'm not here for my old job. I'm here to return something you've been using to keep the city in the dark." Elias reached into the basket of the bike and pulled out a small, portable projector. He didn't wait for permission. He plugged it into the hall's main system. The giant screen behind Marcus flashed to life. It didn't show financial spreadsheets this time. It showed a map of the city's industrial district. Specifically, the properties Marcus had been illegally seizing through shell companies. But then the image shifted. It was a video. Not a grainy security feed, but a high-definition recording from a hidden camera inside the very bike Marcus had once tried to make Elias forget. "You see, Marcus," Elias said, "you were so focused on the spider's web that you forgot the most basic rule of the vulture. We don't just eat the dead. We watch the living." The video played audio of Marcus speaking to a developer, admitting to falsifying the health records of the neighborhood children, including Clara, to depress property values so he could buy the land for pennies. The room went cold. The socialites who had just been laughing were now looking at their plates in shame. Then came the final blow. Elias gestured to the side entrance. Lena walked in, holding Clara's hand. Clara wasn't the sick, frail child the records claimed she was. She was glowing, vibrant, a living testament to Marcus's failure. "This is my daughter," Elias announced, his voice finally cracking with emotion. "And this bike, this $10 piece of junk, carried the evidence that will take every single one of your Phoenix assets and return them to the people you stole them from." Marcus lunged for the laptop, but Silas, Elias's former employee, now dressed in a suit that fit him better than the cab he used to drive, stepped in the way. "The feds are in the lobby, Marcus," Silas said calmly. "And this time, there aren't enough shell companies in the world to hide you." The contrast was absolute. Marcus was screaming, red-faced, losing his dignity in front of the very people he spent 40 years trying to impress. Elias stood by the bike, his arm around Lena, his hand on Clara's shoulder. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who was finally, for the first time in his life, rich. As the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, the audience did something unexpected. They didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They stood up and began to walk out, leaving Marcus alone in his ballroom. Justice wasn't served through a violent revenge. It was served through the slow, methodical exposure of the truth. Elias didn't take Marcus's money. He didn't need it. The federal government seized it all to pay back the pension funds Marcus had looted. Elias walked out of the Plaza Hotel, leaving the bike behind. He didn't need it as a reminder anymore. He had the real thing now. An hour later, the three of them, Elias, Lena, and Clara, sat on a park bench. The city lights were twinkling, the same ones Elias had once tried to own. "What now?" Lena asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. Elias looked at his hands. They were stained with grease from the bike chain, not the ink of a predatory contract. "Now," he said, "we go home. I think I have a daughter who needs to learn how to ride a bike." He realized then that the unexpected thing he discovered wasn't the secret letter or the hidden camera. It was the fact that the most valuable thing he ever owned was the very thing he had been willing to sell for $80 15 years ago. The war is over. The towers still stand, but the man inside them has changed forever. The confrontation is over. Do you feel satisfied with how this played out? Did Marcus get what he deserved, or would you have wanted Elias to take back his billions and rule the city again? There's no wrong answer here. I want to know if you believe in a quiet justice or a loud revenge. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay with us for the final epilogue, where we see what happened to the Daisy Group, and where the teal bike ended up. The world doesn't end with a bang or a whimper. It ends with the quiet realization that you are exactly where your choices have led you. In the weeks following the Plaza Hotel confrontation, the fallout was absolute. Marcus Thorne's Phoenix didn't just fail to rise. It was incinerated by the very evidence Elias had unearthed. The SEC move was swift. Marcus was hit with 64 counts of securities fraud and embezzlement. His assets, the penthouses, the yachts, the private islands, were liquidated to compensate the thousands of families whose lives he had manipulated. Marcus, the man who believed he was a god among men, was last seen in a prison jumpsuit, awaiting a sentence that will likely ensure he never sees the city skyline again. His legacy isn't a building. It's a cautionary tale. Contrast that with the Daisy Group. Elias didn't go back to Wall Street. He stayed in the neighborhood. He transformed Lena's old warehouse into a community incubator. It's now a place where brilliant kids from the basement can get the funding they need without selling their souls. He finally achieved the wealth he once dreamed of, but this time, it's a different kind of currency. It's the look on a young artist's face when they realize they don't have to choose between their passion and their survival. It's the safety of knowing his family is whole. People often ask Elias if he regrets the lost years, the 15 years he spent as a vulture. He looks at the scars on his hands, then at Lena, who is now one of the most respected muralists in the country. I don't regret the pain, he says. The pain was the price of admission. If Marcus hadn't been a monster, I never would have learned how to be a man. Clara is 14 now, and she walks with a confidence that mirrors her mother's. She doesn't see her father as a fallen billionaire. She sees him as the man who pedaled a rusted bike through a storm to save her. She recently won a national scholarship for her work in ethical economics. When asked about her inspiration, she didn't talk about money. She talked about a teal bike. She understands that wealth isn't what you take from the world, it's what you leave behind when you're gone. Elias often thinks back to the moment he bid $1 million on that bike. It was the most expensive purchase of his life, but it was the only one that ever paid him back. He realized that Marcus's cruelty was actually a twisted gift. It stripped away everything that didn't matter. The ego, the greed, the hollow status, and left behind only the things that were worth fighting for. He lost his empire, but he found his soul. Today, Elias and Lena live in a house filled with light and unfinished canvases. The Vulture of Wall Street has been replaced by the Architect of Hope. Silas is the CEO of a non-profit that teaches financial literacy in low-income schools. The teal bike? It didn't end up in a museum. It's in the lobby of the Daisy Group. It's not polished or restored. It's still rusted, the seat is still worn, and the daisy on the frame is still chipped. It serves as a reminder to every person who enters. Never sell your escape for a bus pass. Looking back at the rainy basement on 4th Street, Elias realized that his journey was never about the money. It was about a boy who was afraid of the dark learning how to carry his own light. He finally understood that success isn't a destination. It's the way you treat the people who knew you when you were nothing. The story of the $1 million bicycle ends here, but its impact is just beginning. It's a story of greed, sacrifice, and the ultimate redemption. Looking at where everyone ended up, Marcus in a cell, Elias in a warehouse, and Lena in a studio. Do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural, logical consequence of the choices they made? I want to hear your perspective in the comments below. Do people get what they deserve, or do they just get what they create? Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. This story reminds us that no matter how far we fall, we're only one choice away from a different life. If you found value in this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me bring more of these deep dive narratives to you every week. Until next time, remember, the most valuable thing you own is the one thing you can't buy back. In the end, your life isn't defined by the size of the empire you build, but by the strength of the foundation you stand on when the world tries to shake you. We've spent the last few hours tracing the arc of Elias Thorne, from a basement on 4th Street to a glass tower, and finally to a place of true peace. But this story was never really about $1 million bicycle. It was about the invisible currency we all trade in every day, our character. Wealth, as Elias discovered, is a fickle master. It can be taken away by a market crash, a legal injunction, or a mentor's betrayal. But worth is something you forge in the dark. It's what stays behind when the lights go out and the bank accounts are frozen. Elias often says that his greatest achievement wasn't making his first billion. It was the moment he was willing to lose it all for a girl who had already given him everything. He learned that justice isn't about seeing your enemies suffer. It's about building a life so excellent, so filled with purpose, that their presence in your history becomes a footnote rather than a chapter. He looks at Marcus Thorne now, not with hatred but with a profound, quiet pity. Marcus had all the money in the world, yet he was the poorest man in the room because he had no one to trust and nothing to love. His downfall wasn't a tragedy. It was a mathematical certainty. You cannot plant seeds of greed and expect to harvest loyalty. If you were to ask Elias for advice today, he wouldn't give you stock tips or business strategies. He'd tell you to guard your why. When you're hungry, he says, it's easy to think that money is the answer to every problem. But if you lose your soul to get the money, you'll find that the problems just get more expensive. He's changed. The man who used to measure his day by profit margins now measures it by the number of people he's empowered. He's traded the vulture for the architect, understanding that true power is the ability to walk into any room and know exactly who you are, regardless of the balance in your wallet. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this aftermath is the cycle that has been broken. Clara and the children who come through the Daisy Group aren't growing up with the scarcity mindset that haunted Elias's youth. They aren't being taught to fear poverty. They're being taught to value resilience. They are the promise of a new generation that views business as a tool for elevation, not a weapon for extraction. Clara doesn't just have a heart that beats. She has a heart that understands the weight of a sacrifice. That is a legacy no trust fund could ever match. So, what can you take away from this journey? Maybe you're in your own basement right now, feeling like the world is stacked against you. Or maybe you're at the top of your own tower, wondering why it feels so hollow. Remember this: your circumstances are temporary, but your choices are permanent. Integrity isn't something you find when you're successful. It's the very thing that makes success sustainable. When you face your own Marcus Thorne, whether that's a person, a system, or your own self-doubt, don't fight with their weapons. Fight with your truth. Loving yourself through a transformation is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It requires admitting when you've been the villain in someone else's story so that you can finally become the hero in your own. Elias didn't just save Clara. He saved the boy he used to be. He looked at that teal bike and finally told that 16-year-old kid that he was enough. That he didn't need the towers to be worthy of love. The teal bike still sits in that warehouse lobby, a silent witness to a story that spans decades. It reminds us that every setback is just a setup for a greater comeback. You don't lose sight of the people who were there when you were pedaling against the wind. We've reached the end of this nearly 3-hour journey. We've seen the rise, the fall, the betrayal, and the ultimate redemption of a man who found his heart in a pile of junk. Looking at the entire journey, from the bus pass to the boardroom to the park bench, do you believe that the struggle was necessary? Could Elias have become the man he is today without the pain Marcus caused? Or is that just a story we tell ourselves to make the hurting feel better? I want to hear your final thoughts in the comments. Your perspective is the final piece of this story. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time is the most valuable thing you can give, and I'm honored you spent it here with me. If this story moved you, if it changed how you think about wealth or worth, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the human spirit. Until next time, keep building something that lasts. We began this journey with a $10 bike and $1 million question. What is the true price of a human soul? Over the last 3 hours, we followed Elias Thorne from the freezing basements of 4th Street to the highest glass towers of Manhattan. We watched him trade his heart for a seat at a table that was never meant for him. We saw him lose himself in the spider's web of Elias Thorne, only to be pulled back to reality by the rusted handlebars of a ghost from his past. The transformation we witnessed wasn't just about a man losing his billions. It was about a man regaining his sight. Elias learned that the anchors he was told to cut, love, family, and integrity, were actually the only things keeping him from drifting into a void of his own making. This story matters because it isn't just Elias's story. It's a mirror for anyone who has ever felt like they had to choose between their survival and their spirit. It resonates because we all know what it's like to be underestimated, to be manipulated, and to feel like our worth is tied to a number on a screen or a title on a door. The outcome, Elias on a park bench with Lena and Clara, proves that success isn't a destination you reach by trampling others. It's a state of being you achieve when your outside life finally matches your inside values. As you turn off this video and step back into your own life, I want you to carry this lesson with you. Your circumstances are a chapter, not the whole book. Whether you are struggling to pay rent or struggling to find meaning in your success, remember that your worth is non-negotiable. If you are facing your own Elias Thorne today, someone who tells you that you are nothing without them, remember the teal bike. Remember that the smallest act of sacrifice, the simplest piece of truth, can bring down an empire built on lies. You have the power to redefine your narrative at any moment. Don't wait for $1 million revelation to start living with integrity. Start now. Build a life that you don't need a vacation from. Build a legacy that isn't measured in concrete and steel, but in the lives of the people you've lifted up along the way. If this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something valuable about resilience and success, please leave a like and share your biggest takeaway in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights are what truly make this community special. Hearing how these stories impact your real-world struggles is why I do this work. Remember, you are not defined by what others think of you. You are defined by how you respond when life tests you. Elias Thorne proved that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's building a life so beautiful that your critics become irrelevant. Until next time, stay strong, stay focused, and never let anyone convince you that you're nothing. You're everything you choose to become.